click the go live. So we're going to be doing that. So don't focus on that. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going live now. Okay, hi, I think we're live now. Welcome everybody to our final session of 2020. I'm very excited to have Vignesh over here with us. And today we're going to be talking about the trials and tribulations of scaling agile in the real world. Vignesh, welcome. And thank you very much for coming on our very last session of 2020. And I just want to welcome you, and I hope that we have a great session today.
Thank you, Ahmed, and great to be on here on the session. What an interesting year 2020 has been.
I know. What a surprise and what a shock for all of us in terms of who could have imagined, right? Who could have imagined at the beginning of the year that this is what's going to be happening, and these are the kind of challenges that are going to be thrown at us, right? And I think, it's a testament. I'd like to know. Let's see how did things go your end?
Really interesting. I think the important bits are, the whole paradigm of Agile has shifted from physical co-location to virtual co-location. And that's what I think the pandemic has brought out in terms of some assumptions, some myths, some ways of working have changed, and hopefully changed for the good and changed permanently.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, so let's start off with doing a quick introduction. So Vignesh, I know you as a great friend and colleague, and I'd like to just get an idea of if you could just walk us through a little bit about yourself, your journey, and how did you come across Scaled Agile, and what's your journey actually been like? So let's just start off with telling the audience who Vignesh actually is.
Yes, sure. So fairly simple. I'm a program lead with a leading digital telco running some of their major digital transformation programs. So my journey as to how I've got here, all my career has been in telecoms technology over the last 15, 16 years, all of it going from retail and channel management to contact center and IVR, to then products, to then commercial, to then now major transformation programs. And as you can imagine, running major transformation programs in the typical traditional waterfall way is very much, let's say, out of fashion, or not the most common approach taken, where some traditional industries might still be, but everybody has or is transitioning out into the agile world. And with the size and scale of the programs that we were looking at, I think it was really important to say that Scrum or any of the methodologies that were good for small squads were not quite suited for our needs. So we had to look at something that we could scale quickly and make it the right thing or the right fit. And while looking at methodologies, I think Scaled Agile came out top while we were comparing, contrasting, working through the methodologies, through the approaches, through some best practice examples of organizations like Spotify in terms of what a Spotify model of a squad and a tribe is, how does it fit, what does it happen, what doesn't happen. So yes, we did a lot of due diligence, and I think Scaled Agile was the right approach for us.
So what did you, when you looked at Scaled Agile over, say, the other kind of models, like you mentioned the Spotify model over there, and maybe you also mentioned, and maybe you also looked at some other models as well, like, you've got large scale Scrum and
Mhm.
you've got discipline Agile delivery and other scaling Agile. What was it that stood out about Scaled Agile that made yourself and all the executives feel that that might be the right framework for them when they've got so many other options out there available at the moment?
So I think the maturity of the model was the most important thing. The whole way it was laid out, the whole way it was structured, the way it was proposed to be executed. Let's say we never executed, so we didn't know how the reality stood till we've done it. And now with battle scars, I would be able to tell you what really are the challenges. But I think it's probably the most structured, most well laid out approach to run large transformation programs. There are certain specifics which, if I start recalling 3 years ago where it stood, I think they were the most effective at learning and development and organizing structured content to take people. And I think with Scaled Agile, the most important bit which people forget or which people do not realize is moving people from a traditional delivery methodology to Agile in itself is a big change process. And to take people on this change journey
Yeah.
is the hard bit. And learning and
Yeah.
development is an important part of taking people on that change journey.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of, SAFe gets a lot of flack, from the agile community now. Oh, it's pseudo waterfall, and it's like, it's not properly agile, and it does get a lot of flack. And I think it's kind of died down a little bit over the years, but it's still very much there. And I think one of the things that I always say is that, well, look, if you look at where a lot of the organizations actually are, the large organizations, they're still shockingly, stuck very much in a waterfall model. Now, don't get me wrong, in some contexts that is the right model, right?
Mhm.
Let's be frank, right? But it's frequently applied in an incorrect context, right? And so I think that, it's if nothing else, I'm like, you know what, guys, it's well structured, it's got things, it's more mature than a lot of the other frameworks, arguably, and therefore shifting to that would be a positive, even though it may not be the end state, right? So okay, great, fantastic. And so tell us a little bit about how you shifted from, I believe, if you could tell us a bit about your early career and how you shifted over into Agile, and what were some of the key kind of turning points for you along that journey?
I think I've been incredibly lucky when I start looking back at my career. The really important phase was I never stuck to one thing for too long. So it was always a series of experiments. If I call my career a series of experiments, I'm not far off or wrong about it. Yes,
Yeah.
experiment and fail fast. That's what Agile tells you. I've experimented, failed sometimes, succeeded other times, but it's a bit like being exposed to all the areas of the business. And I think that's what I've gained. And sometimes they say you're like a monkey hopping from one tree to the other. I don't mind that, and it's probably the right thing. I know that the lay of the land or the size of the forest I live in, and that's the advantage I've gained out of it. And if you are implementing large scale transformation programs, the important bit is to understand your business. And to understand your business, having worked in multiple areas of the business, I'm able to relate and empathize with them. And then when it comes to the reality dawning of what are the personas that are working on it, what are the pain points they experience, because it's quite easy to put myself in the shoes of, okay, so this is a commercial stakeholder. This commercial stakeholder has these kinds of pain points. So success for me would be to resolve these pain points. And that's how I've come about into this state. Now, where I've moved from, I think if I trace back to my last 2 or 3 roles, one of my first roles was in a major transformation initiative where I think it was a Ofcom initiated initiative where a certain operator, not hard to guess, had to separate their lines of businesses as per Ofcom guidelines. And that's where I set my foot into telecom. I started my journey. And that was more when you have big transformation initiatives that are regulatory driven, there is a lot of structure, methodology, rigor, and old school approach in them. From there, I moved on to doing what would be multi-channel retailing, so which was the buy online, collect in store, interesting things like that. Then on to automating the IVR or the contact center space to say, how can we launch voice-based IVR? How can we launch voice-based authentication? Your voice is your password kind of stuff. And then moved on to digital, which was then catching up as the buzzword, on to now where I am and running big digital transformation initiatives. So always in touch with technology, but moved around the business in terms of channels, retail, contact center, in terms of products, and then come on to transformation now.
So when we talk about, you touched upon a very important point over there, which was around the regulatory side of things, which I'd like to just touch upon a little bit over there. How have you found Scaled Agile in terms of its ability to actually support the regulatory framework, which kind of in some ways, in some arguments, is kind of the antithesis of kind of the agile kind of philosophy? How do you think Scaled Agile has supported you or not supported you? Where are the gaps in that as far as the regulatory requirements are concerned?
I think this is a really divisive question in some ways. And interestingly so if you take two use cases, let's say in a regulatory environment where you have to launch a new financial stroke IFRS, let's say, there is a certain protocol to be followed. There is a certain set of steps to be done quite sequentially. And there isn't a lot of scope of iterate around, experiment, learn, do certain things, do prototypes, do proof of concepts. It doesn't quite exist. It is quite well dictated. This is how you need to do it. And agile or scaled agile finds it difficult to hold on to such context. Now, you see the other context, which is around a network launch. So say that all the telecoms operators are now moving from 4G to 5G. There is regulatory there, but regulatory is a part of the overall capability that we are launching. The capability is a technology upgrade from 4G to 5G, a network upgrade from 4G to 5G. But then surrounding it are lots of regulatory criteria, which can be managed either in isolation or alongside a scaled agile release train or a solution train. And that's where I think where regulatory is a part of the overall framework, scaled agile works. Where you are doing large scale capability implementation. Where regulatory is the only thing you're doing, scaled agile is probably not the right approach, where everything is quite crystal clear and laid out. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is what you need to do.
Right. So where the expectation is little, dare I say, little innovation, because it's like a known domain. You need to just go through a set of known steps, and you must do it that way. And obviously, to some degree, it binds your hands. One thing I have found, though, is that a lot of these regulations, because I've been involved in some of these SOX programs and other things as well, and applying agile onto them, is that there is frequently another way of cutting the cake, if you like, right? Okay, I was going to say skinning the cat, but I don't know if that's the right kind of phraseology to use, right?
Cutting the cake sounds better. Definitely sounds better.
Cake, right? So, I think that, can you map things back to, so for example, if you've got, say, you've got to show certain rigor in terms of your testing, rather than showing, your test documentation that you have actually done, or your quality documentation, you might refer that or try and cover off that requirement requirement by referring to automated tests, for example, that run automatically overnight, as an example, right? So it's like kind of, how do you kind of satisfy the need for that, but can you do that in an agile way? And what I found is typically there is a way in which you can do that if it's approached in the right way. So okay, that's very interesting. So in terms of, can you tell me, give us an idea of like a time when you were like, you're using agile or even scaled agile, doesn't matter, right? When you actually look at that and you go, oh my God, I just wish we were using waterfall. You wish that we were using a waterfall methodology. It would just make my life so much easier. Can you give me an instance of whether you've had a kind of a scenario like that where you felt somewhat constrained by the agile methodology, or has nothing like that ever happened to you?
Again, this is a really interesting question where I will give you an answer without giving you a lot of context, because there is some organization specifics to it. But the important bit around it is, let's say something is failing and it is failing. It's not meeting its KPIs, but there is so much around within the business to specifically say that no, it is successful because we have now seen the working prototype. This works. We are incrementally building on it, but the final end goal of the end solution is not going to be the right one. How do you then assign accountability, apportion accountability, and identify who or which team is it that needs to change? It's all one big family, right? With the whole idea of servant leadership, we are in it together. We are one team. Together we succeed. Together we fail. Doesn't quite work, because typically in an old school waterfall model, all I would have done is call in an auditor, say, can you please audit this program and tell me where exactly the problem lies, right? And in a very classic example of Alan Sugar and Apprentice, there would be somebody at the end of the line who would be, you're fired, right? It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right in the agile context that we are all in it together, but it is really important to realize that agile or non-agile, auditability is important, accountability is important, and identifying who or which team or which individual or overall what is not performing, and then take remedial steps. So there is a bit of common sense, which in the soft agile context always gets dumbed down or quite non-transparent, and where agile should be transparent.
So are you saying, I don't put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to crystallize this for the audience as well. Are you saying that in terms of the accountability and the return on investment, you're finding that the accountability side of things is maybe lacking in terms of you don't know when a project actually finishes or ends? Or what, can you crystallize that a little bit more in terms of?
Yeah, I think the accountability focus is really important. There are individual, let's say you take a wheel context, there are spokes to the wheel. Each spoke is important in its journey, and if one spoke is not functioning, the wheel can collapse. And I think it's important to identify accountabilities and identify those spokes, and not say the RTE, the STE is the only spoke in the wheel that will be visible to the business. Everybody else is kind of visible, but is quite protected. And I think there are some things, while we are on an agile journey, we need to acknowledge either some parts of the business are non-agile, or they are already agile and they are operating in a certain way. Let's take finance as an example. Right?
Oh my God! I don't know why. I hope you know why I'm laughing, right? Okay, but go ahead.
Yes. So with finance, they submit their quarterly results onto the stock exchange, onto the stock market. So you could say they follow a really good cadence of a quarterly release cycle, right? Or a quarterly reporting cycle.
Sure.
That's a beautiful way of looking at finance. The other way of looking at finance is finance have to plan for what is going to come ahead, which is next year. And they will do an annual planning cycle for you, for us, for everyone to then plan for what's going to be budgeted for next year. Now here lies the paradigm. To say within Agile, you only look 3 months ahead, maybe 6 months ahead. You don't have a full line of sight. You have a vision and you have a roadmap to say, this is where I want to get to, but you don't really know how much it's going to cost you. Either your job is to fix the capacity of the team and say that irrespective of whether more comes or less comes next year, I don't have a crystal ball to gaze, but I'm going to deliver the most valuable items within my existing capacity, in which case your cost becomes predictable. If you want to keep Agile really Agile and say, I can go up, go down, then everything relies on, the ROI. And the most important ROI is what are the KPIs that you're setting? Is the program delivering the outcomes it is supposed to deliver against either its business case or its KPIs, whichever way you frame it? So the important bit is some bits of finance, if you see, are Agile, which is quarterly reporting. Some bits of finance are probably not Agile because they're asking you to predict the cost 12 months down the line, 15 months down the line. And you will have to live with this reality. You're not going to run on a mission to change finance and change the way the whole stock market operates or the financial predictability model operates. So the interesting balance to be found is there. The interesting balance to be found is in accountability. When you say a sales leader in a business has a sales target, he is measured on it and he is either incentivized or fired if he meets or exceeds his target or doesn't meet or exceed his target. The program needs to be run with the same ethos, with the same approach, with clear lines of accountability, even within an Agile structure. And I think that's what I'm trying to crystallize and say.
Okay. All right. And so what would you say then, just segueing, that's a nice kind of point for us to segue into the next question, which is what would you say then is what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced? Because, the organization, the telecoms organization, and I know which one it is, of course, is very large, famous telecoms organization. It's quite representative of the kind of large organizations with, the typical kind of political challenges that you would face wherever you go with these kind of large organizations. So what would you say were some of the largest or the biggest challenges that you faced when introducing Agile into this organization, right? And then also probably the second part of the question is that if you could also talk about how you overcame some of those as well.
So I think the biggest challenge is the change challenge. And I think people don't realize how hard it is to change people's mindsets of what they've been doing in the past and has effectively worked for them. It has its limitations, but in a broad sense, let's say if you've been using waterfall in your organization for eons and it has worked, there is no effective driver for change or need for change. The hardest bit is getting people across that change curve to say, I don't want to change, it works, to I'm ready to listen. I now want to consider change if you can sell me the change, right? So you can do change in two ways. One, you can force the change by effectively being an insurance salesman, right? Or selling the fear of death to say, what happens if you die? What happens to your family? You need the money, you need the cover, the family needs the cover, right? And that's that the insurance salesman analogy works really well in a corporate environment where you say, our company will perish. All our competitors are moving so fast, so quickly. They're launching products to the market so quickly that we have to change, right? That's
You're going to be out of a job. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the insurance salesman paradigm. You absolutely have to sell the fear of death, the fear of non-existence, non-relevance, and you push it. Or what you can do is much more subtly, but bring an external change agent. What happens is when you are internal and when you are a part of the organization, it's very difficult to convince your peers and colleagues who you've been working with into a new idea. And this external change agent or agents can be your agile coaches. And it's really important when you do it first, don't just try to say, I've read up a brilliant idea on the internet and look, I want us all to do it. It doesn't work. To drive the change, you need external change agents. Bring the external change agents in, go on the journey along with them, get people on the learning path, get people to understand, assimilate what they are up for, what the merits and demerits are. And it's really important to be transparent as well, to say everything is not hunky-dory. There will be challenges on the way. There will be adaptations on the way, because the textbook approach of what is applicable in the purest context might not be applicable in the organization's context. So I think it's really important to adapt, to translate what is said in the ideal scenario to what is relevant and how to make it relevant to your organizational context. So one, drive the change, identify the change. Two, make it relevant to your organization and your specific context. I think those are the two things. If you do really well, I think we would be able to introduce Agile and then become that Agile team that then delivers outcomes on a consistent, repeatable basis.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Fantastic. And I can give testament to when I've, visited some of your teams, and I can actually see that, I tended to drop in, for snapshots of time, and I'd come and I'd visit for a little bit, and then I'd go in, and then I'd come back 3 months later. And it's a bit like, when you watching your child every day, you don't see them growing, right? But when somebody comes in from outside and actually and then comes in and go, oh my God, 3 months later, you're completely different. You're a completely different team. You guys have gone up the maturity curve, and everybody's looking around and go, really, have we? And he's like, yeah. You're not realizing it because it becomes so natural after a period of time. But it's that initial jump, I think, that initial hesitation to shift from the unknown to from the known to the unknown, which is where that challenge actually is. And actually, to be honest with you, many teams that I see, not many, but a number of teams that I see, they struggle at that initial, and they can't even necessarily get past that gap, or at least it takes them a very long time to get past that initial jump from that waterfall mindset to the agile mindset. What do you mean? What do you mean I'm not going to know what's going to happen 3 months down the line? What do you mean I don't have a plan for something that's going to happen, 4 weeks away? What do you mean I don't know how we can run a program like that? And then that kind of that challenge can seem insurmountable for many organizations and many people, and having that, getting over that initial hurdle, I think that's where the magic actually occurs as well. Well, one thing that you just triggered me is around the personas, and the magic of that is what I'd say is, because it's coming back to your initial point that you raised early on, is about how important being clear on what your goals are and your true objectives are, and how personas fit into that. Can you just give us a really brief overview of that? Because we're short on time, but it'd be good just to get your views on.
Yeah, I think personas,
what are they, and how have they helped to help you along this journey?
Yes, absolutely. So I think if you look at it from two directions or two dimensions, you have the execs who paint a vision, who say this is where we want to go, and this is the ultimate situation or nirvana where we want to reach. And I think some people click on that approach of defining a brilliant vision and looking at the bright future ahead in 2 years, 3 years time. But what we know in transformation is we pick up the biggest, hairiest topics, the biggest pain points that we need to resolve for the business. And just painting a vision just doesn't work, or it works for a small percentage of our stakeholders. The majority of the stakeholders are in day-to-day troubles, problems, issues. And the really important bit is identifying who the personas are within the organization, as in who the key stakeholders are, who the key business functions are, and what are their pain points. It's quite easy to go to a person and say, what is not working well, and critique something and tell me your pain points, and then work on the basis of improving them and put in a transformation plan to say, these are the things that we need to improve. And like a ladder approach or a step approach to say, if we do all of these things one after the other, incrementally, we will achieve that vision set by the execs, or that approach that they want us to get to. And to get to that nirvana, it is solving persona by persona, pain point by pain point to reach that. And it's exactly like I'm saying, steps of a ladder. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Each and every step of a ladder takes you closer to your vision, takes you closer to your goal. And identifying those right up front, identifying the pain points and sequencing them along in a logical flow to say where the most value lies or where the most benefit lies is the mantra to success, if I may say.
Good. Nice. Okay. Let me just ask the final question now, if I may, before we move on to the audience, to see if there's anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask you. So guys, if you're watching this, if you've got any questions, please start to put them through into the chat now, whilst I ask Vignesh his last question. So Vignesh, okay, so you got this fantastic time machine, right? You get in this time machine and you can go back 10 years in the past and you go and meet Vignesh from 10 years ago, right? What 1 to 3 insights, right, would you give Vignesh from 10 years ago, this young whippersnapper that was, he thought everything was great? What would you say to him? What advice would you give him? What words of wisdom would you give him that can help him to traverse these 10 years that have passed more easily?
So I think, to summarize it, I think I've touched upon this in different ways, flavors, topics in the previous questions. But if I really crystallize it, treat it like a change program. Don't underestimate the amount of change needed to move somebody from one methodology, one approach to another.
Right.
Do not rely on yourselves or your textbookish knowledge or your Google search. Bring in an external change agent, right? Really important. Bring in an external change agent who's been there, done it, who knows what is happening, who has experience across industries, across companies, who is able to take us along on that learning journey. Third, do not use what's exactly in the textbook stroke training material, because that is a utopian view. Customize it to your organizational program context. So these are the 3 key takeaways that I have, that I will give to myself if I were to start 10 years ago, or the young Vignesh, if I may say.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so guys, any questions? Please put them in the chat. We've got a question that's come here from Shabir Sheikh, and it goes like this: are there any considerations for managing large upgrade projects? For example, OS upgrades, tech upgrades, where there are a large number of users exist and they're constrained to iterate in large batches of work. I'm suspecting that if you upgrade one part of the infrastructure, you probably got a whole bunch of other stuff that is related to that and needs to be done in a big batch. How would you what considerations are there for using projects like that with Scaled Agile?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. So on one side, you have huge business-driven transformation initiatives which have technology as an enabler. On another side, this is the total other end of the spectrum, where this is a technology driven initiative, which is kind of important to business. One, for new features, two, more importantly, for security and vulnerability upgrades, which is where the OS upgrades generally sit. Security, vulnerability, really important, plus the new capabilities that get launched. So even in this, I think the personas approach would work. Now, my simplistic thinking is you can split your organization into a set of personas to say you have a set of users. If this particular OS version release is launching some new functionality, let's say, then you want to identify that functionality and who does it benefit the most. Create a list of personas to say within the organization, I have these sets of people. These sets of people will benefit the most from this key capabilities, maybe security, maybe a particular business function, let's say supply chain, maybe a particular business function, let's say legal, because it has a really good way of documenting or documentation or version control, etc. So identify those personas and whose pain points will be resolved or who benefit the most. And then you can roll it out in persona batches, is one way of looking at it. Again, I'm coming at it from a business side, less from a technology side. So I'll pass it on to Ahmed to get his views in terms of, Ahmed, what do you think? You have a much broader view than I have.
Well, I think it is, like you say, it is an interesting question. And guys, if there are any more questions, please put them in the chat. Because then we'll wrap up after this or any other questions that come through. I think there are two elements of this, right? One is a technology upgrade. So Scaled Agile, it's very, if dare I say, straightforward in terms of technology enablers are there. Whether their OS is shifting over to the cloud, doing making major upgrades of technology that involve a large number of users, etc. That's fairly run of the mill in terms of incorporating that into the Scaled Agile framework. You would do that as enabler features, enabler epics, whatever they may be, right? Now, the bit that becomes interesting over here is the kind of constraint that you've mentioned is that there needs to be large batches of work, which leads me to believe that perhaps there is some sort of there's a large dependency across the infrastructure layer. So what you do need to do is you need to really challenge whether those really are hard dependencies, or are you just used to doing that way? Okay. Now, if let's just say for argument's sake, they are hard dependencies, you've got no option but to upgrade a whole bunch of a set of functionality together because they're all dependent and they're tightly coupled with one another, then that's your release cycle. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't split up the work into smaller chunks, right? You can, but it just means you may need to batch that up into a release cycle and then drop that in. Not ideal, but that's the real world that we live in, right? If you've been working in a legacy environment, right, with a legacy infrastructure, do not expect to suddenly come in and say, hey, we're going to put a Facebook, Spotify kind of model overnight, and suddenly all of the dependencies are going to flow away and everything's going to just suddenly work miraculously in a perfectly agile way. It's going to be a journey that it takes for you to get there. And there's going to be a lot of foundational infrastructure work needs to be done to be able to get to that truly agile state as well. So I hope that answered your question, Shabir. If not, just pop something else in the chat. And if there are any more questions, we'll just give a moment or two. If not, I've got a question for you, Vignesh. What have you got planned for your Christmas and your New Year? This is your holiday now, or what's going on?
Yeah,
Vignesh world.
Luckily, I'm already on holiday starting Monday, which was yesterday. So I'm off for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But the world has changed around us. So I was planning to meet family and friends for Christmas, but clearly with us going into tier 4.
I know.
We're not allowed to do that. So
I know.
I haven't worked out alternative plans, but probably it's a Zoom or a Skype session. That's what is going to happen. Yes, I'm not the lastminute.com or just in time in terms of purchasing gifts for my son. They're all available, all ready to go. It's just at the opportune moment they will all be made available, let's say. Other than
Fantastic.
that, I think it's an ordeal, so to speak. So we are all going to be indoors, trying to do our best in terms of getting the festivities on. A lot of telly, a lot of food. I'm getting fat, not fit.
All right, fantastic. Look, have a great holiday, Vignesh. Thank you very much for your insights and your guidance on that. I certainly find that interesting. I hope everybody on the call found it interesting as well, guys. Hope you got some benefit out of that. If you do, please like this, subscribe to this channel. We talk a lot about, just we try and bring on, really great professionals like Vignesh that have actually done this stuff in the real world, and they know that it's not beautiful and it's not always pretty and it doesn't fit the textbook always 100%, but that's the world we live in, right? So if you did find that useful, please like this channel and like this video even, and subscribe. And I look forward to speaking to you, Vignesh, next year, and the audience look forward to catching up with you in the next videos that are going to be starting in 2021. We've got a very exciting group of individuals and executives coming up already for 2021. So stay tuned and have a great Christmas. Happy New Year. Stay safe. All the best. Thank you. Thanks, Vignesh. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.